And so, here we are, at the final Disgaea game, so far, in the main series. Disgaea 3, Absence of Justice. Now this was actually a pretty important game in Nippon Ichi Software's library, because over the years they've been going through quite a few financial difficulties. They're better now, but this game was a huge step in recouping a lot of losses that they had had over recent years, especially when Disgaea 4 came out, which was the game that finally brought them back in black. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's focus on the game for now. Much like the last two games, Disgaea 3's story is not a continuation of one of the last two games. It takes place in an entirely different netherworld and follows entirely different characters. In fact, there isn't even a character from the past games involved in the main story of this one, so it does feel completely unique and completely stands out from them. The story takes place in yet another netherworld, but the difference here is this netherworld is actually one giant academy, which is meant to take demons in and train them how to be the best demons that they can be. In this world, honor students are students who continually break the rules, refuse to hand in homework, never show up for classes, and so on and so forth, and are highly revered. And delinquents are students who do the exact opposite. They follow the rules, they wash their hands when they go to the bathroom, they turn in their homework, and they follow curfews. Now keep this in mind because it does play a huge factor in this game. The story centers around Lord Mao, who is the #1 honor student and the freshman leader here at Evil Academy. He also happens to be the son of the Overlord, who happens to also be the dean of this school. Mao wants to kill his father, and so to that end, he has conducted months upon months of research, and by research I mean he read a lot of comic books and watched a whole lot of anime, in order to try and find a way to kill his father. And his research led him to conclude that only a hero can kill an overlord. Thus, Mao goes out to steal a hero's title. He abducts who he thinks is a hero, a young man named Almaz, who actually turns out to be, well, nothing more than a cowardly guardsman, but his heart is in the right place. He ended up giving himself a fake hero title, which Mao now possesses, replacing Almaz's title with the title of Demon, meaning that if Almaz does not get back his hero title within 666 hours, he will become a demon as well. And so Mao, still wanting to find a real hero's title, decides to find a way to give back Almaz's title and find a way to defeat his father with the power of love and justice, something that all demons are supposed to detest. Of course, nothing is ever really that simple, and while the story does take a lot of twists and turns, his initial enemy appears to be Rasbarrel, who is not only a former childhood friend of Mao's, but also happens to be the #1 delinquent in the entire school. She's assisted by her 2 lackeys, Kyoko Needleworker and Asuka Cranekick. And they have a bit of an interesting relationship. Now, the English version of the game does not directly imply anything between the two of them, but the undertone is still there. In terms of all 3 of the games that I've played so far, especially after playing them all back to back, I can safely say that this game has the goofiest plot out of all 3 of the Disgaea games to date. Gone are the serious undertones from the second game, and even by the standards of the first game, well, there is a lot more self-referential humor and pop culture parody in this game than there ever was in the last 2 combined. Not that that's a bad thing, mind you. This game is still extremely hilarious, but it does manage to actually get a bit dramatic on you from time to time, and quite a few of the twists that were in the story later on, I honestly did not see coming, which is a pretty good feat considering that in the second game, pretty much every single twist was very well telegraphed in advance. Of course, one of the reasons that this works so well is the fact that, well, every single one of these characters is completely ridiculous as well. Out of the 3 game's protagonists, Mao is perhaps the most manic. He is actually quite an interesting character in terms of depth, but I can't discuss that portion of his personality due to spoilers, but instead I will say the guy is friggin' crazy. The idea of learning something new usually involves dissecting something for him, and he's so overtaken with the possibility of learning about something or discovering how something works and how it can be applied to a weapon of mass destruction, he will literally start panting and drooling at the idea of using love and justice against his enemies. By contrast, Almaz is actually this game's moral fiber. Being a human, or a human that is slowly becoming a demon, he's the one who tries to speak reason when Mao comes up with crazy, insane, mad scientist-type plans. He is probably the character who develops the most throughout the course of the game, or at least has the most obvious character growth. And while he is supposed to be a character that I'm supposed to root for, I always found him to be one of the most annoying characters in the game, because every single piece of dialogue that he spouts is either a whimper, a whine, or a scream. It is really hard to get behind somebody who, while he starts out cowardly and grows into being a hero, still sounds like a coward by the end of the game. However, aside from the main characters, of course, most of the other characters are there for exposition or for, well, comic relief. Rasbarrel and her two flunkies are a pretty good example of this, as they never really change that much throughout the story. They do add a pretty good element of humor and exposition to the story, and they are certainly a whole lot of fun to watch, especially their back and forth with Mao and Almaz. But in terms of development, there is null for any of the three of them. They remain self-proclaimed badasses throughout the entire story, and thank God for it, as this is probably the only time in my life I will ever see an extraordinarily polite and helpful badass. But of course, if you want a really goofy character in this game, you need look no further than Mr. Shampoo. No, not Samurai Shampoo, Mr. Shampoo. Mr. Shampoo is basically making fun of the stereotype of the wise but mysterious mentor. He's the teacher of the school's Forgotten Home Economics program, and is a badass martial artist, but is also a master chef. And he loves to pepper his speeches with cooking metaphors, which makes him extraordinarily hard to understand most of the time. Once again, in terms of gameplay, a whole lot of the core concepts remain the same, but many of them have been heavily improved upon. Combat is basically the same, but there is one huge difference that you will notice right away, and it was one of the touted features when the game was in pre-production. The geo-blocks. Instead of ordinary geo-panels and geo-symbols this time, the geo-symbols have been replaced with geo-blocks, which, as you'd surmised, are cubic blocks that have the exact same effect as geo-panels, but can be stacked on top of one another to sort of combine their abilities. Now, destroying them, of course, can still destroy the other geo-panels below it, but if you throw two panels on top of each other and they're the same color, they will explode, which is extremely important for strategy later on.